I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar that it's been organised under the auspices of the Education Leadership Network Europe, ELNE, a network set up under the Erasmus Plus framework of the Directorate General for Education and Culture of the European Commission. I'm Harold Hislop. I'm an adjunct professor at the Institute of Education at Dublin City University here in Ireland. And I'll be moderating this discussion this afternoon. Our focus will be on sustainable collaborative leadership in schools. That's a topic that has exercised quite a lot of the Irish education school system for some time. And this afternoon, I think we'll be sharing some of the perspectives, the challenges, and the opportunities that we've certainly experienced in Ireland. But before we go into the formal business, I'm going to invite John McGowan, the current president of the European Trade Union Committee for Education and a former General Secretary of the Teachers Union of Ireland, and the organizer of this seminar, to welcome you formally. So John, would you like to speak to us? And John.
Sorry, thanks very much, Harold. As Harold has said, ELNE is a project consortium that aims to bring together, and has indeed brought together, key education stakeholders, importantly, including researchers, to discuss and to seek to advance the project of collaborative, sustainable school leadership. The project started in 2023 and runs until 2027, and it had its initial Education Week event last year, and gave rise to some very rich discussion. It currently has 100 partners. Now, the lead partners are the teacher union organization, ETUCE, the student umbrella body, OBESU, the European Parents Association, EPA, and the School Leaders Association, ESHA. And the project is coordinated by the Employers Federation, the European Federation of Education Employers, EFE. Look, I suppose it is a commonplace to say now that school leadership is a key topic for all stakeholders, and indeed, in particular, school leadership has enormous impact on students, on learners, those whom we all seek to serve to the best of our ability. It is also very clearly a key topic for teacher trade unions, and it is our view, and I don't think there'd be many who would demur from this, that the education system at all levels, including individual school level, should be run on a democratic basis. And democracy involves sharing of both, if you like, influence and responsibility. I think it's particularly appropriate that we get to discuss this now in the very unfortunate circumstances, I suppose, where the very concept of democracy as it has been practiced to a good or a bad degree, or a greater or lesser extent across Europe, is under fundamental threat. But we maintain a core belief that education, high quality public education, is a cornerstone of the European social contract. And in a sense, our trade union perspective is informed by that. It's appropriate then that we should discuss how the quality of education can be enhanced through collaborative leadership. And I would like to just finish by thanking everybody for attending the seminar. It will be available very obviously as a recording at a later stage. We do understand that limitations apply because of the timing, which happens to coincide with teaching time and leadership time. But thanks to those of you who are here, and in particular, thanks very much indeed to all of our contributors. And I'll hand back to you, Harold, at that point.
Thanks very much, John. And before we get into our opening presentation, I should say that we'll have a have a keynote address from Patricia Mannix-McNamara, who I'll introduce in a few moments. And we'll also have a panel discussion from three different perspectives immediately after the keynote address. And then we'll have an open panel question and answer session. So as we go along in this session, if a question strikes you, an observation, an experience you'd like to share with us, just pop it in the chat function. We're monitoring that chat function, and I'll be drawing on those during the panel discussion. Another practical issue is, would you please leave your own mic muted during the presentations? And also that warning from John about this is being recorded. So just so that you're aware of that. I also want to, at this point, just say a very big thank you to Axel Day, who is our ELNE technical coordinator and is keeping us all on this screen and going and live. So thank you very much, Axel. So our opening speaker is, as I said, Professor Patricia Mannix-McNamara from the University of Limerick. And it's a great pleasure to introduce her to you. She's one of the foremost thinkers about school leadership and the realities of school leadership in Ireland. She teaches on the leadership programs at the university, and she has a particular interest in fostering leadership dispositions and empowering leaders, both new leaders, prospective leaders, and current leaders in school. And her academic work is interesting because it spans both the education field, but also health education matters as well, and health education policy. And it focuses on promoting a really positive work culture. That's one of the strong themes in her work, about a positive work culture through practice, but also through research and policy development. And today she's going to talk to us about what do we mean by sustainable leadership, first of all. She'll then share some research findings with us about the lived experience of school leaders, and then she'll pose a few challenges for us. So, Patricia, over to you.
Míle buíochas, thank you so much, Harold. What a lovely invitation and a lovely citation. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm going to share my screen while I'm talking at the same time, if I'm going to multitask, if I can manage that. So we'll try that now and see if that's sharing. Is it sharing?
Perfect.
Lovely.
Yes, perfect.
And can I leave it like that? I can? Lovely. Okay. And it's moving? Perfect. So thank you so much for the invitation, and I hope you can all hear me. I took a few liberties with the title because I wanted to just focus our attention a little bit about what we're understanding about this concept of sustainable leadership. And then I'm going to come back and maybe challenge this concept a little bit. I think if we can do a bit better, if we can raise our bar a little bit in relation to it. I'm conscious, I'm from the south, I'm from Kerry, so I can speak fast. So if I'm going too fast, Harold, leap in and tell me to slow down, which I would really appreciate. I'm very conscious of that. I have taken the liberties because I spend a lot of my time reading and writing about leadership, but the rest of the time visiting leaders and talking to leaders and getting out to schools to really get an understanding of what's happening. And we're hearing a lot of talk about sustainable leadership. And my screen is here, so I'm going to look sideways for a moment and say there are a lot of definitions about sustainable leadership. There isn't a consensus in our literature about what we mean when we speak about sustainable leadership. So when I speak to some school leaders, it's about succession. When I speak to other school leaders, it's about health and well-being and resilience. When I speak to others, it's about system thinking. So what are we talking about really when we're talking about sustainable school leadership? Recently, we're talking about it in terms of there's a reduction in people applying for leadership roles. We're seeing an increased movement in people stepping back from leadership roles and moving into teaching roles again, or moving into middle leadership roles. And there's some really interesting dynamics going on there. And certainly post-COVID, our conversation about what we want from our work lives and what we want in relation to our leadership has changed significantly. So there's lots of factors, there's lots of things happening when we're talking about sustainable leadership. What I'd like to draw your attention to here is that Hargreaves initially talks about it as the positive impacts of our work endure. In other words, is there a sustained endurance that remains throughout our role as a school leader? But Evans just positions it as almost in contrast to exploitive school leadership. So we can have leadership that is empowering and capacity building. We can have leadership that is destructive. It is a continuum in the way that we think about it. Bendel and Little talk about it as a systems conscious approach. And I think that's a very important way to think about sustainable leadership, is that systems consciousness and the system level thinking that we need to engage in. But perhaps the most influential is Hargraves and Fink's work, where they talk about collective responsibility. It doesn't drain our human energy or our financial resources. It fosters an open exchange of ideas and creativity with a community of shared learning. In other words, collaborative practice. And I think that's a very important way of thinking about sustainable leadership. Glasser talks about it in terms of our personal resilience. I have some questions about that I'll raise as I speak to you. The one that I'm really interested in is Davis's link to moral purpose. And I'm going to explain in a few minutes why I'm saying this particular emphasis here, because purpose is very important for leader well-being. And I'm beginning to think that some of the issues that we're seeing around the challenges to global democracy is actually about purpose. And it's about how we understand trust societally. So what are the trends when we're talking about school leadership and sustainable school leadership then? And what you'll see here is effectiveness is perhaps the first piece that we can cohere in the literature. In other words, impact building. What does a leadership culture look like? What are systems thinking? What is systems thinking? We certainly need more of that. And what is openness in facing challenges? What does that look like from a lived experience when we are school leaders? We can be open, but we can't always be completely transparent. But yet we put transparency in as a very clear value for what's important. So that's a complex space. We're also here looking at collaborative responsibility, and we're talking about future readiness here. What is the strategic thinking, and how is our work as school leaders stakeholder aware and also stakeholder informed? And what actually does holistic mean? Because when we speak about school leadership, both in the way that we speak about it in policy and the way that we speak about it in research, we divorce it from the person. And I'm not sure that we can do that. So I think when we're talking about leadership, we need to look at what's the personhood, what's the disposition that we're looking for, and how does that intersect organizationally? So that's a complex space for us to begin to look at. And then just to maybe add another layer to this, and the reason I have this for you to look at is that it's not from education. So this is how business thinks about sustainable leadership. And I think it's good to always look outside our own boundaries. And here at the individual level, if you look at it, you're seeing a very high weighting on emotional intelligence. That's quite interesting. Moral values, developing people, situational awareness means being able to flex. And what does that mean in leadership when our system isn't so flexible? And what does that do to us in terms of purpose as leaders when we're in that space? And I'm going to say that unfortunately, we can't assume that all leaders have that naturally, but it can be cultivated. So we just need to think about our assumptions around what we're bringing into the leadership space. When we look at it from the organizational level, we're looking at it from strategic thinking, capacity building. When we're overloaded, how do we think strategically? When you're overloaded, your strategic thinking switches off. It's really interesting dynamic that we know about human behavior. So we can't assume either that our leaders have this level of strategic comfort naturally. And how do we build that in school leadership? And the third, that we're looking at cross-level, or how we integrate our personal practices with our organizational outcomes. And this is where we're going to talk about purpose. I'm actually going to come back to this in a minute, but how do these intersect? And we get into real difficulty in terms of health and well-being as leaders when our purpose becomes challenged, or when we feel, and I'll say it myself as a previous leader, when you're deluged by what I call administrivia, all those roles that you need to do that are taking you away from the main reason why you applied for the job in the first place, what's actually going on for you and how you feel about your work. So what I'd like to show you a little bit is about the lived experience of school leaders. And what you're looking at here is post-primary on the right hand, or primaries on the right hand side, and post-primary are on the left hand side. And I'm drawing from data that was funded from the IPPN and the NAPD. Now, what I'd like to look at here are the general trajectories. The numbers are not going in the right direction. That's the first thing I'd like to draw our attention to. So what we're hearing a lot in the research that's coming back and in the practice is that the pace of work has increased and increased. We know this. We know it post-COVID. It certainly escalated during COVID. We thought it would slow down. It didn't for leaders. It escalated with clear reason, but it has not abated. So what are we doing? How much work are we doing? These are the types of questions that are worth asking. And if you look here, you'll see the healthy working population is taken from, a lot of this data is based on a Mashalak survey, which is around burnout and stress and well-being at work. So using those inventories, the Danish population is used as the baseline population for healthy. They have the highest stats for healthy work population. And we're looking here at self-related health. We're looking at burnout, and our numbers are really problematic here at post-primary, but they're also really problematic at primary. If we're looking at stress, it's the same, somatic troubles, sleeping, etc. We are absolutely in the wrong direction in terms of what we're looking at for a healthy working population. So this is where our leaders are residing in terms of how they're thinking and feeling about their work. And if you can see this slide, what I really want is to draw your attention to the similarities that are driving this. So the sheer quantity of work across both sectors is the primary issue. Lack of time to focus on teaching and learning is the second deepest frustration and cause of upset for our school leadership. But yet, what we need to remember here is that's the reason why they applied for the job in the first place. I've examined several PhDs of school leaders who describe this phenomenon and describe what it is like for them to experience it. So the government initiatives, teacher shortage, resource, etc., I mean, they're relatively in the same trajectory. They vary slightly, but nothing hugely significantly. But what we need to look at is core purpose, number 2, and type of work, number 1. And this is driving the way that we're thinking around work. Now, I'm sharing this because this is where I'm definitely taking a liberty, but this aligns with my own area, which I have spent, I suppose, about 29 years researching now, which is around the culture of work and the culture of workplaces. And there is a dark side as well as a good side to this. There's an increase in workplace violence, unfortunately. There is an increase in workplace bullying. And while there was a lull initially in terms of cyberbullying, we're now seeing an increase again in it coming back. So we're seeing quite abusive teachers online. We know this in the way that we can see how social media is operating anyway. Very complex space in terms of social media and what is allowed to be said, and the concept of free speech, also complex and bigger than this conversation today. But there's also a gender trend here, and we need to be conscious of this too. So we need to look at what is actually happening in relation to the increase in the numbers. I'm just leaving it there for you to see. And I'm sure if you want to see more of this data, I'm sure you can be in contact with us to find that. But what I want to show you is our burnout rates. And if you can see this, we can see, I'm pointing my arrow, so I hope you can see it. But we're seeing in 2022, high and moderate at the 35%. And we're looking at 2023, it's going in the wrong direction. It's growing. And we're seeing it again in 2024, 38 to 42. What I'm interested in, and this you're looking at first post-primary, what I'm really interested in here is the next piece down. So we know that wherever there is high levels of stress and burnout, there is an inverse relationship to job satisfaction, but not here. It's not happening here. So something unique is happening in our leadership population. So we know that the job satisfaction, look at the numbers here, is still quite high. And yet this is the journey that they're in relation to their well-being and their feeling of control at work. Burnout occurs not so much from overload of work, but from our lack of agency in relation to the overload of work. And that's what's really interesting about this piece. So I'm asking myself a lot of questions and I don't have the answer yet. So I'm open to conversation about what is this anomaly? Why are our numbers absolutely inverse to what the global numbers are in other populations? And I think it's about moral purpose. I think it's about real belief in the work that we do as leaders, in the support of children. I think there is a service dimension, a vocational dimension to doing good work for good people, for a better society. That's what we do when we engage in leadership in schools. And I think that's what keeps the job satisfaction high, despite a context that's proving to become more and more difficult to work in. And it's interesting that primary are reflecting the same thing. Now we see that job satisfaction is slightly lower than the healthy work population here for primary, but the same trend, the same inverse trend, it's not available for us to see. So what we're seeing in the stats are that even though our leaders are carrying significant challenges and significant workload, their job satisfaction is not decreasing. So that is just something really interesting that we need to continue to research. But the work-life conflict numbers in both are really worrisome. So in other words, work-life balance, how much do you get to switch off when you go home? So what I'd love to draw your attention to, because this is what I'm really interested in as well, is where is the support coming when we're in this space? And what you're looking at here is the professional relationship with colleagues in your workplace and professional relationship with colleagues outside of your workplace are among the highest supports that leaders have outside of their partner. And it is the same for both sectors. So in other words, network reduces the isolation of leadership, and that collaborative space with people who also know the role both within and outside your context is actually what's helping abate some of the challenges in relation to the context of how we're working. And now what I want to say to you really is that it's not all doom and gloom. So I don't want to have started with it's all, because it's not. There are some really interesting things happening in Ireland around this. And I must say, in terms of policy saturation, looking at our schools has played an absolute blinder. The saturation, the familiarity, the understanding that is happening in schools around this particular policy is remarkable. And that is quite an achievement in terms of policy. And I think why is because it's explicit and naming the core focus of the roles, but makes it really explicit that leading, teaching and learning, which is the main purpose of why we go into this type of leadership, is valued very highly in this space. However, if we know that we are overburdened with the administrivia of a role and we can't get to lead, teaching and learning, and I'd like to talk about another reason why we can't get to that, we see what's called a purpose conflict. So we see that we are then in difficulty in actually doing the work that we really want to do because we're pulled into dealing with what I'd often call the interrupt-driven practice of the day. But there is also a question about how ready we are as a system to allow our school leaders to lead teaching and learning. How open are we in our schools in Ireland to have our leaders move into our classrooms and into the spaces where we can review and feedback and engage in deep and meaningful conversations about what counts as quality teaching and learning in our school. And that's a complex space that not all teachers are ready for and not all stakeholders may be ready for. So that's a challenge that we need to look at. The other piece I think that has made a huge difference, and our own research is telling us this, is that our leaders are now saying that without distributive leadership, which escalated or ratcheted up as a way of working post-COVID, that they feel it could not be sustained in their role if they did not have this. So this we know, but it's also complex in terms of how ready are our teachers to see themselves as teacher leaders. How ready are our middle leaders to not see themselves as what we used to call post holders with an area that they were responsible for, but actually that they're part of a larger leadership team. We have, just to go through these really quickly, Mishnuk, which is a program of networking and support for newly appointed principals, Forbert, which actually supports school leadership teams together, Taoiseach, which brings deputy principals together, CORE, which brings middle leadership together, and LIONRA, that affiliated network for principals who have completed Taoiseach. So implicit in the thinking is that networking is really important, and that when you come out into that space, you will get maybe a broader vision about how to be more sustainable in your role. Now, I've gone through things quite quickly, but what I'd like to think about just for a minute is where we can go next. With my team here in Limerick, we're talking about thinking less about sustainable, which is a little bit like surviving the job, and having raising the bar and thinking about what is flourishing leadership. It's not just about sustainable, but it's actually about flourishing, and what does that look like? We believe that distributive leadership and opening up the leadership disposition of our teachers is a way to do this. But we also say really clearly that school culture is not benign. And there isn't always a responsiveness or a reasonableness or a readiness within the larger culture for us to do what we need to do as leaders. And how do we challenge that? How do we open up that space? It's a big question. So in policy, when we create it, we assume that culture is benign, and I'd like us to unthink that maybe a little bit. There is real need for intersectoral conversation about how we can support leaders to lead teaching and learning in their schools. But we have not had a conversation in any way about followership and organizational citizenship. Is my teaching job just teaching my content, or is there an organizational citizenship piece for me as a teacher within my school? Because certainly in universities, it's quite different in relation to that model. It is expected. So there's having those explicit conversations. So what I'd really like us to think about is having a new conversation about leadership, reconceptualizing what it is to be a leader at the moment, because we are using old thinking about leadership and old models about leadership for a very new and changed nature of leadership, which John has even referred to. Leadership is under siege globally. And if it's under siege globally in the macro, it's under siege in schools in the micro. So I'm going to finish with a quote from Otto Scharmer, who I quite like, his book Peer Review, and he says that leadership is about the capacity of the whole system to sense and actualize the future that wants to emerge. That's the art of the possible, and quite exciting. So I might hold there, Harold, because I could go over time, and we could come back later if you want to. I'll stop sharing. I hope that's okay.
That's perfect, Patricia. Heavens, you've been very provocative to us about a number of issues there. And can I just on one, maybe as a point of clarification, but I was really interested in that slide that you talked about, where we have high job satisfaction among school leaders, and at the same time high burnout, and whereas you'd expect them to be the reverse of one another.
Yeah.
While in a way, it's fantastic that despite burnout, people have maintained their enthusiasm. And I know you attribute that to the culture of a vocation for teaching, a service to others, and so on. But is that sustainable in the longer term? Will that attract new entrants to the profession, and will they stay in the same way? Or do you notice any difference between younger or more, so less experienced and more experienced respondents to those surveys?
Yeah, I haven't looked at that. It's interesting to mine that data. We haven't really looked at that. I don't think it is sustainable. I think the writing's on the wall here. I think we need to see it. I actually am really worried about the level of personal identity that is attached to the role and purpose, because then if you get burnt out, the whammy is twice as bad, because it's your identity and yourself that's as damaged as the sense of you as a worker in an employment space. It's really complex. It's not as good a thing as you might initially assume that it is. To me, that's a flag to worry about.
Okay, well, we might come back to that point, Patricia, because what you've very much thrown up is questions for the different stakeholders in the system, and that's brings me to introduce the panel to you, because we have panelists here who represent different stakeholders within the educational system. So our first panelist is Anya O'Sullivan. And I suppose Anya represents the school management perspective in this. Anya is the General Secretary of the Association for Community and Comprehensive Schools in Ireland. That's one of the school management bodies that works to support, excuse me, specifically school leaders and boards of management within school in their work. So she's going to be talking to us in a moment or two about how the school management structure, the board of management in particular, can actually help to realise and the reality of collaborative and sustainable leadership, but also tackle some of the challenges that Patricia may have mentioned. Our second panelist comes from one of our education and training boards. That's the Education and Training Board for County Donegal. Dr. Martin Gormley is Director of Schools at the Donegal ETB. And I suppose for our colleagues abroad, an Education and Training Board is the nearest equivalent in the Irish context to a local education authority. They would be responsible for funding and management of a large number of schools. And Martin, in his role as director there, has particular responsibilities for supporting, advising, and providing professional development for school leaders, and particularly school middle leaders, where he has put a particular focus in his work, as well as his work on supporting the improvement of teaching and learning throughout the schools. And our third stakeholder and third panelist comes from the trade union perspective. That's David Waters, who's president currently of the Teachers Union of Ireland, a trade union that represents teachers as well as school leaders, and indeed teachers and lecturers in third level colleges as well. So a big warm welcome to the three of you. And what I've asked each of them to do is to reflect on how from their particular sector they see their organisations, be it Board of Management, be it ETB, or be it trade union, help to realise the ideal of collaborative leadership, but also address some of the challenges that Patricia may have thrown down to us. Anya, can I turn to you first?
Let me just go to my slideshow here from the beginning. How's that? Is that okay?
Yes. And maybe if you go to full slideshow.
I'm in full slideshow. Is that working for you? It's telling me I'm
in your notes as well, actually.
Okay, because it's
That's fine. Go ahead, Anya.
Is that working? Okay. Okay, so right, I'm as Harald said, I'm going to speak about this from the Board of Management perspective. I'm working with the ACCS, which is the management body working with community and comprehensive schools. So in post-primary education in Ireland, we have three strands of leadership and management. We have the trustees and patrons who establish the schools and appoint the boards. We have the Board of Management then, who is the oversight function and is tasked with managing the school. And then we have the executive. The board will always delegate operational matters to the leadership team. Patricia has already referenced LAOS, looking at our schools, that which we benchmark our activities, our leadership activities in schools against. And the other document that I'm going to look at is that which enshrines policy, which is Circular 318. I suppose key for me in advising boards is the piece where every teacher has a leadership role within the school community and in relation to learning, which is our core purpose. The assistant principals that, again, Patricia referenced, we acknowledge in those documents occupy positions of strategic importance. And I suppose if we accept that school leadership is you know, the linchpin around school success, and really that few schools are as good as they'd like to be, the distributed leadership approach, we would argue, facilitates a shared responsibility that enables collaborative practice, and it's that space that we all want to be in. In relation to the Board of Management and Circular 318, the policy document, the board is involved at all stages. So in terms of at the very beginning, where the school community is establishing its needs and priorities, the board initiates that process. In turn, at recruitment, it's a competency model that we're looking at, where we're talking about people who apply for these positions are shown to have, I suppose, the skills and the knowledge that underpin effective performance. One of the most important pieces coming out of that policy is around the flexibility in relation to the assignment of roles and responsibilities, which leads us to a place where we can build capacity with people, that we're not just doing the same task all the time. We're looking at the wider lens, where we have taken on a number of different responsibilities over the period of our career, and as such are able to build capacity. The provision for reporting is then the final piece in the policy document, where it allows for for the board once again to review how our leadership and management resources are actually enabling effective teaching and learning. When Fullan talks about drivers for change, I think two of the most important ones there are the collaborative piece and also the capacity building. And he would argue always that superficial change is very often what happens because we don't focus on building capacity in our schools. When we are advising our boards of management around that and around having the sustainable and indeed what Patricia calls the flourishing leadership, we talk about involving people early and involving people often. So we talk about that whole if one wants to introduce and to embed change, one needs to have, as Belan would say, the followers with you. Really what's I think when we talk about distributed leadership, we're not just talking about individuals taking on roles. We're talking about the synergy that can occur between people, the joint activity that gives energy to leadership in schools. So involving people early, keeping them involved and giving them a chance to discuss and deliberate over the change that is being sought, shall we say. Schools are very busy and people are very tired. So if one spends time in that space initially when looking at change, there's a better chance that people in the school will feel ownership over change. And again, I suppose we talk about the importance of relationships and relationship building. I am finishing with this particular slide because it highlights part of what we do in our training pieces with boards of management. We talk about the whole kind of the whole tightrope walking, the balancing act that's involved in leadership. And for us, the critical conditions that we ask our boards and our school leaders to really work on are on the screen there. The psychological safety, the place where vulnerabilities can be expressed, the trust. Trust is using that word again, that linchpin idea. It impacts on the quality of relationships. It's important. It's vital for a healthy school culture. An ability to empower others. And we won't do that unless we are advising people and advising our school leaders that it's okay to fail. It's okay to take risks as long as we learn from those. Encouraging respectful disagreement in an effort to learn is really important. The idea that we have a culture of mutual learning and we get away from the culture of blame. This is not about somebody taking something on, not working, and then blame being assigned. The last two pieces there, I think, are very important. Senge often talks about or has spoken about how leaders very often jump from the inquiry position into the advocacy position. So in other words, take on board and advocate for a particular stance. It's really important as schools trying to build collaboration that we spend time in the inquiry space and that we give people a chance to question, to argue, to disagree, and to take ownership of the change. And I suppose finally, with any kind of change, it's so important that we don't just do it because we did it. We actually review it, revisit it, and if it's not working, give people the opportunity to work out why it's not working, and perhaps it's something that we shouldn't have ventured into in the first instance. So it's about having that kind of a culture in school. And I suppose for the board of management, it's really important that in their conversations, there is that diverse group of people. There, in our boards in general, we look at nominees from the patrons, nominees from the teachers, nominees from the parents. And it's really key to a successful board discussion that those voices are diverse and that they feel that they can be heard and that they are spending their time, let's say, for example, looking at the leadership reports that come in in the annual report at the end of the year, that they're spending their time looking at how the leadership activities are impacting what's happening in the classroom, and that there is time given in meetings to those kind of discussions. So, Harold, that's me.
Okay, thanks, Anya. Maybe you can stop sharing your screen at this point. And I'm interested though that you seem to be suggesting that actually the biggest task for the Board of Management is creating an environment for the school leadership to happen in the way that we want. Um, but do you think boards of management, I mean, and you've defined what that environment is. You know, you talk about trust
Mm.
and the openness to risk taking, the mutual learning, not a blame game, and so on. Do you think most boards manage to create that environment?
I think that boards can, if you have the right mix on the board and if they have the correct relationship with the principal. I think it's really important that, and we talk to our boards in training sessions about this, how it's important that the principal, that it's not an echo chamber, that the principal brings the information and keeps them informed, and then that they do with that information what I've just described. What we don't want is for the principal to bring the information along and for the board just to agree and so on. So I do think, Harold, that there is a lot of potential, and I think following on from what Patricia said, I think the LEOS piece, the looking at our schools policy document, has been a game changer here, because boards are coming across it a lot more regularly in their work. And whether that's through whole school inspections, and we'd hope it isn't just that, but whether it's through recruitment, whether it's through those leadership reports, I think they are coming across it a lot more. And I think they are more informed in relation to what is now required in schools. But yeah, it's I suppose the senior leader is very much key to the culture that will be in the school. And how the senior leader interacts with the board is going to be reflected in how the senior leader interacts with others in the school and how they build that culture of collaborative leadership.
And I suppose for both yourself and Patricia have mentioned looking at our schools, and I suppose for our friends abroad, we should say we ought to explain what looking at our schools is. Looking at our schools is a publication from the Department of Education Inspectorate. I have to declare an interest here as I once worked for that organisation. But what it sets out is a set of standards
Mm.
across all areas of schools, to which really a set of standards to which schools ought to aspire, which they can use to self-review themselves, but also it's the basis of external inspection as well. But it's also been the basis of a lot of thinking and training for both teachers, school leaders, and other actors in the school system. And one section of it deals with school leadership and the culture of school leaderships that it would see as the best one. So that's just, and sometimes we refer to it in a shorthand in Ireland as LOAS. So it's looking at our schools.
Yeah. And
it's a national framework.
And Harold, if I could just make one point on that before you finish, I suppose for me, what's really important is that it's on its third or fourth iteration. And there's been a lot of learning across the 20 years that from when it was first introduced, so that it is more, this iteration is probably the one that is embedded the most, as Patricia might have referenced earlier,
Okay. Well, that's the perspective, the stakeholder perspective from the Board of Management perspective. Let me turn now to the Education Authority. Dr. Martin Moroney. Martin, you work as a director of schools in an ETB. You have a large number of schools and school leaders that you work with. What do you see as the ETB really contributing to the development of that sort of school leadership we want to see?
Yes, Harold, and I was just reflecting on the contributions both from Patricia and Anya. I think one of the key things is our middle leadership tier, because if we look at our schools at the minute, our senior leaders are snowed under with the amount of initiatives and the amount of changes that has happened, and it's happening at the moment. For example, you have the whole senior cycle reform, you have Be Kilta, that's the anti-bullying stuff, you have transition year statements, you have new guidelines around code of behaviour. So all of these things are coming in on our senior leadership. So I think we have to really put a bit more work into our middle leadership tier there, so that they're there to support the senior leadership around roles and responsibilities that are meaningful and that are relevant to the work of the school. And I also think, you see, one of the things Patricia mentioned there was about the application for senior leadership roles. If we don't have that middle leadership prepared and ready and trained up in order to take on the senior leadership role there within the school system and within the education system, there's a vacuum there then, and that's why perhaps we're not getting the level and the amount. And I would agree totally there with what Patricia mentioned there about the moral purpose. You know, from my conversations on the ground here with local principals and deputy principals, they do always refer to the amount of work and the challenges within the work, but there's always a great love of, you know, being there for the community and being there for the school community, particularly the students and the staff of our schools. So, you know, it's the middle leadership I think we really need to work on here in Ireland to support our senior managers.
Martin, you said you had a couple of slides that you'd like to talk to us through.
Yeah, I will indeed. So I'll just start off here now. If we can start from the beginning. Can we see that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
if you use it full screen, then it'd be great.
Yeah,
great, perfect.
Yeah, good. So just starting off here, I suppose I'm working here in Donegal Education and Training Board, which is one of 60 DTBs here in Ireland. And it's located here in Northwest Ireland, up in County Donegal. And as part of that, we work very closely with EDGE around, say, professional development opportunities for our senior leaders. And I think Patricia went through all the various programs that are provided there. And as part of our webinar here today, we wanted to look at that whole area of, you know, collaboration and leadership collaboration. Now, I don't know, is that, yeah. So if we look here, you see, in terms of professional development, this is how ETBs are supporting our middle and senior leadership teams at the moment. The first thing is we're working very closely with EDGE in terms of the programs around developing leaders, also in terms of the National Association for Principals and Deputies, that's the NAPD, and also the management bodies there, the Association for Community and Comprehensive Schools, the Joint Managerial body, and then Education and Training Boards Ireland, and working with those. Then in relation to all ETBs, we have these collaborative networks where, you know, our principals would meet, our deputy principals meet, our, say, special education needs coordinators meet, our GESH coordinators, our middle leaders, AP, assistant principal 1s and assistant principal 2s. But one of the things about those collaborative networks, there's a whole formal agenda to those, but I think one of the most important things about those is the informal, the conversations that's happening in the hallway, the conversations that's happening over the cup of tea, the relationships and trusts that are being built between the teams. Because when people have an issue or a problem, then their first point of contact is somebody they know in a similar role. And we found that very, very successful, and the feedback that we've got has been very positive towards that. And I mentioned there just about our sustainable practices there, that, you know, we do need to work on that next tier, that middle leadership tier. So I suppose in terms of key collaborative leadership models that we've worked here in our ETB, you know, we always encourage our principals and deputies around the distributed leadership model. And it's not just about paying lip service to that. We have to put that into action. And what that means is, it means assigning appropriate and relevant roles and responsibilities to our middle leaders. But then it's about checking in with them. It's about encouraging them. It's about recognizing, acknowledging them work, and when it's done well, to acknowledge that. And if it needs improvement, to be sitting down and doing that little bit of mentoring role is very important. I mentioned the community of practices, which are invaluable in terms of both the formal agenda, and I mentioned the informal. And then what I noticed from talking to principals now and deputies at the moment is, you know, around action research and reflective practice. They're reflecting more on the roles, what has been working well, what hasn't been, how can they improve on things. And I think that has been important over the last while. And I know one of the things we're also have been encouraging now is this whole area of mentoring and peer coaching. And we've worked with the former Centre for School Leadership, who have been part of EDGE now, around the programs that's there, and encouraging our leaders to avail of them individually and as school teams. If we look at some of the case studies here in Ireland in which our ETB would be involved in, as well as a lot of others ETBs nationally, the instructional leadership programme was an important one because that helped set out to improve teaching and learning. But one of the core, I suppose, cornerstones of that programme was that it had to involve senior leaders, because if senior leaders aren't involved in the whole teaching and learning agenda, it doesn't happen within schools. So that's one of the things that has worked quite well there. And it's also provided leadership opportunities to the middle leaders and other teachers within schools. Leadership clusters within the ETB sector then is another important one. For example, ETBI hold a middle leaders summer school every year. And the last 2 years that have been held down in the University of Limerick. And I know, Patricia, you would have been very involved in that program there. But I recently addressed an induction program for principals and deputy principals in ETBs nationally. And a lady from the floor put up her hand and she said, look, I wouldn't be sitting here today except I attended the middle leadership school that ETB organised. So it just shows you the power of something that sometimes you wonder, is this making a difference? Is it making an impact? But that very one statement that we had a person there in the room who actually stood up and said they wouldn't be sitting there only for they attended something like that was very, very powerful. And then the whole thing about mentoring and coaching, that's sometimes done formally and sometimes done informally. What are the challenges? I think one of the big challenges in schools all the time is time and the time constraints. For example, if you look at assistant principal twos within schools there, they're not getting additional time to carry out some of the real heavy roles that they have to do there. And now with senior cycle reform coming in, there's going to be additional roles within schools, there's going to be additional work there, all of those things there. I think we need more formal recognition for middle leadership roles. I think Circular Letter 03 of 2018 was very important and is very important and was a real game changer in terms of the reviews and the planning ahead, looking what worked, what didn't work. But I think we need more structure on that middle leadership and, to have formal roles. For example, if you look at our post-primary schools at the moment, the special educational needs coordinators, schools are being very creative about that role and how they arrive at it. That should be a designated post within our schools because of the service that we provide to students with special educational needs. I think also sometimes we get our leaders who do a leadership program and it's finished and they say, look, I've done the program, I'm finished with it now. We need to just make sure that there's long-term engagement with CPD around leadership. Opportunities, I think what we're doing today shows you the power of the digital world and the digital tools for collaboration that are there now that weren't there previously. I think we need to work closer with our higher educational institutes. We've been doing that in terms of UL, DCU, University College Galway, UCC in recent times here as an ETB, and all of those have worked quite well. And then, of course, with the stronger links in the document there that we've referred to today, that looking at our schools is a very, very important document. So in terms of ETBs, I suppose, like, fostering a leadership capacity is so important because if we don't put in the correct leaders in our schools, I come from a rural county here, it can have a profound effect on a rural community if the post-primary school is not functioning at the level that it should be. And in order for a school to function, it needs to have strong leadership. So, there's a real onus on us to make sure, first of all, we make the right appointments into leadership roles, but when people are appointed, that we support them appropriately. And I just wanted to leave you with a thought there. Effective leadership is not about individual power. It's really about empowering others. And that's the way a good school works. If we can get our senior leadership team right, and that they're empowering others right throughout the school there to take on roles, initiatives, roles and responsibility, we then can have a successful school, which is highly effective in terms of looking at our schools. So without further ado, that would round up my presentation there. I would like to thank Education Leadership Network Europe for the opportunity to present today, and I look forward to participating as part of the panel discussion.
Martin, thank you very much for that. And Martin, can I pick up on that last point that you talk about the need, recognizing and growing the potential that's there? I mean, it sort of brings me back to the issues that Patricia raised too, because I mean, it's very, very clear that she's seeing, that dichotomy between jobs or the high job satisfaction, yes, but also the huge burnout and the negative sides of the job too. And I'm reminded of that phrase, you can't be it if you don't see it,
Mm,
right?
mm, mm.
That's we say that in career guidance for young people all the time. And if they're seeing, your middle leaders, if your young teachers in your ETB are seeing the burnt out teacher, yes, maybe the school leader who's has job satisfaction, but that they're burnt out, how do you convince them to even become a middle leader, let alone become a school leader?
Yeah, I think they see a lot of teachers that go into the profession, the majority of them have a moral purpose. They're there for the right reason.
Mm,
And I think what we have to do is we have to support those who go into the leadership roles. We have to recognize it, we have to acknowledge what they're doing, but we have to support them. And that's why time is very important, because time is a commodity in schools now that is so difficult to find, because you've seen all the changes with the new junior
mm.
cycle. We see changes coming in with their senior cycle. So time is something there. And that's probably the factor that's causing the most burnout there. But what I would say in terms of senior leadership, we need to give them help. And that help comes through the middle leadership. And that's why we need to formalize that more. Because in the schools, say a lot of assistant principal one posts are soaked up with year head roles. But there's a whole lot of other roles and responsibilities that fall on a principal, and if he or she can distribute and delegate them the relevant roles down, and the formal recognition for those, and people get a sense of satisfaction of having a formal proper purpose within a school, I think that will help to develop our leadership capacity right through.
Can I be very skeptical and say that's a very idealistic answer, Martin, to the question? Because in a way, and I'm not putting words in his mouth, but I wonder, is David going to say to me that actually what you're saying is, well, we know they're really convinced people, they have this moral purpose about education. So actually, I'm going to make the system work on the thin air of moral purpose, and actually make them put up with the burnout.
Yeah, well, what I would say to that is, you see, people can take on roles and responsibilities and they can do them. But, it's like, having effective practice and highly effective practice. And that's highly effective practice in a middle leadership role requires time to do that. So I think we need to recognize that, and we can't bury our head in the sand. And I think we have a moral purpose and a moral duty. And I am an idealist, I would say that, because, and I would make no apologies for that. I would like to see the ideal world, but I would strive to do that, to reach towards it, and I would do everything within my powers to get there. But I think we do need to support that middle leadership role in order to support our senior leaders within the school.
Okay. Well, thanks, Martin. And having put words in David's mouth, or it's me, come close to it, David, from the trade union perspective, and you represent both teachers, but also you represent school leaders as well in your union. I mean, where does the union come into this picture of supporting this or realizing a sustainable and a collaborative leadership?
Well, I think everyone realizes collaborative leadership is the way to go, but it's mere optics unless you put in the infrastructure and the financial supports behind it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a wonderful term, but if you don't have, say, the necessary post responsibility for teachers to attain to and to progress and support senior leadership, well, then it falls flat. If you don't have staff meetings where people are actually asked their opinion and they contribute, then it falls flat. So I mean, I suppose it's what it's supported with is the major crux behind it, because otherwise it's just another latest fad that comes in. Because when you read about it, it's great, and like any school that actually operates properly probably has an implicit collaborative leadership kind of culture anyway. But unfortunately, we do have a lack of investment in education, a severe lack of investment in education, and that's where I fear that maybe this won't come into fruition as much as it should.
Do you want to talk to us more about those points in your input, David?
I'll do it now. I had it full screen for a second and it disappeared on me.
That's okay. You're far ahead with it. Yeah.
Okay, look, sure, we'll go ahead and see anyway. Okay, I don't know if you'll be able to read them in. Look, thanks everyone for inviting me to talk on this. Look, I decided to come at this from the perspective of from the president of a teachers union, but also I'm an AP1 post holder and I'm a practicing teacher. So it's kind of both the national negotiation element and the local level. So I'm going to talk about this in two perspectives. So the first one is the governmental and department and what we can do there. So utilizing unions. So like if collaborative leadership and leadership in general is to be effective, then people need extensive knowledge of the sector and how it operates. And for a little to no cost, but with a very high dividend, involving the trade unions and the management bodies, and using their expertise in initial teacher education and leadership programs would equip those entering the profession or those entering new roles within a school with far more information on how to deal with the new pressures and new situations they're going to find themselves in. So like currently, most teachers enter the profession with very little knowledge around contracts and circular letters. And as a consequence, when they get promoted, they know very little about contracts and circular letters. And look, we are the experts in industrial relations, and whether we like it or not, IR is a feature of leadership. And currently the TUI visits most colleges for a 2-hour session with second year PME students, and we're frequently told it's the most beneficial 2 hours they get over their course. And I kind of feel if the TUI was recruited to help design a full course, even possibly a graded one, the net result would be far more knowledgeable teachers who are able to contribute more to leadership positions and the running of schools, and as a consequence, far more equipped teachers as they progress in their careers. And similarly, this could be done through other management courses. We represent principals as well, and we are frequently told about the deficit in training provided by IGN and that. And I think this would be a great place to start. The restoration of posts, look, we've alluded to it slightly there. Look, this is critical to the operation of schools. And when you examine it, like who was lost most because of the moratorium? And it's students, all right? Pastoral care, co-curricular activities, they've all been affected. And this is at the precise time, and it was alluded to in Patricia's presentation, when we're in the greatest societal need, which, you know, all the complexities of the internet and cyberbullying and everything like that, and anxiety. And the hollowing out of these posts due to austerity has a chain reaction effect. So firstly, on the students through delivery, the teachers on their career progression, and then principals who are like not only lose their eyes and their ears on the ground, but also have this ever increasing workload pile up. And this just causes stress and sometimes inappropriate designation of duties that are not official posts. And that ultimately causes resentment in a school, and that causes resentment amongst the staff and loses that collaborative spirit. The next point is on a similar theme. Like if we believe in a collective or a school, in a school involving everyone, and we want to foster a culture of collaborative leadership, then we need to start by including our new members of staff into the school. Like currently teachers have a 2-year probation period before they're fully, you know, comprehended on a permanent basis within a school. And management at local level have it within their gift to offer permanent contracts from the very start. And this needs to be encouraged from by the department, because I mean the TUI did a survey and only 30% of teachers start on full hours, and I think it's about 12% start on a permanent contract. So I mean we have a teacher recruitment crisis. We need to make it attractive. If you want them to be embedded in the school, put down their roots in the community, well then a permanent job is the way to do that. Time is our greatest resource. It's been alluded to a few times already, and school management and teachers can never get enough of it. And for a collaborative culture to exist in schools, and for everyone from the principal to the teacher to get behind this idea, then their time needs to be valued. All right. There is an obsession with data and analytics. Right. There's this metric frenzy that causes resentment among staff. And it withers away collaboration, collegiality, because every week a new strategy or innovation is published, and suddenly schools need to adapt. And ultimately, the view becomes management are imposing these changes, teachers lose time with committees and meetings, and then a genuinely good idea comes along, but there isn't enough will left in the tank because all the volunteerism is gone, because they're exhausted on initiative overload with things that an awful lot of people actually don't see an awful lot of value in. Sorry. Just moving on then, I suppose, maybe that's more on a higher level, what could be fed down into the system. In a school, look, high trust. This has to be a core element to this. And the clue's in the name of collaborative leadership, right? We collaborate with each other. But for that to happen, it must be based on trust between equals. And I have seen excellent principles and I've seen very bad principles. And micromanagement or dictatorial or authoritarian leaderships, they just lead to tension, and the net result is complete relationship breakdown. Like if leaders choose to be overbearing or, you know, I don't know, for want of better, spying or whatever on staff, the school starts to decay from within. Like it immediately falls apart. I go to lots of different schools and I can tell within about 3 minutes whether this is run well or not. It's just a feeling you get from the staff. And you only need to look at the UK for a rich tapestry of bad practice, right? Teachers need to be trusted to do their jobs and implement school decisions. And like when a decision is genuinely made by staff as a collective, then it is owned by the staff and has a far greater chance of being effective. Fairness, consistency, and transparency. Now, this seems obvious, but unfortunately, you can destroy a whole school atmosphere in a single day by not adhering to this. So they all go hand in hand with a collaborative leadership style, particularly around timetabling and promotions. But we have seen where, you know, short-term gain is valued by getting a selected person elevated into a position, and it results in the long-term destruction of a whole school relationship. And it's just not worth it. And if this continues to happen, well, then we won't have our collaborative leadership structure. Even in the transparency front, I mean, some management choose to hide behind, you know, this ever-expanding smokescreen of GDPR, right? Including openly sharing timetables, and this immediately gives rise to suspicion of something untoward, and that's not healthy for a school, especially because teachers feel excluded and that they're not trusted with the most basic information. And finally, look, the schools that operate best, sorry, I'm going to talk about social dialogue and collective agreements just briefly. Look, the schools that operate best usually have a very strong union presence. We must remember that leaders are also usually members as well, but a confidence principle embraces engaging with the workplace committee. It gives them a snapshot as to the feeling of the school, it allows them to see where they need to improve or what they need to address. And abiding by these nationally agreed procedures, it creates a safe environment where everyone feels free to say their piece and move on. It sets the parameters of the game, and that is really, really important. And finally, look, I've gone through briefly, there are points there that maybe we'll come back to, but I just want to end with this fact, which I thought was very interesting and kind of summed up collaborative leadership. And look, unionized schools had lower infection rates during COVID-19 because all enlisted and all had a common cause. And making your school the common cause is probably what collaborative leadership is about. And it involves everyone, but it also involves resources and staff to be genuinely listened to. I'll leave it at that for a moment. I'll stop sharing. Hold on. I can't hear you there.
Thanks, David, and a very interesting statistic there in your concluding comment. So we've explored this round now from different perspectives, and we've had Patricia's input. So we have a number of questions actually that have come into us. And I'm just going to get one here to kick off. I might ask each of you for a quick reaction. Patricia had a very interesting statistic that the biggest sense of support, or the greatest support, was felt by school leaders from co-leaders, be it other people in their own school or in another school. She talked about networks. Did you find that reassuring, or did you find it a hopeful finding? Anya?
I found it reassuring or hopeful. For me, it was common sense, because I feel that, and I would have known this myself as a school leaders, teachers get each other. teachers work closely with each other, it makes absolute sense that they would get more support from each other in the work that they do than maybe from what they might perceive to be external, or as in the department, probably the policymakers implementing the policy, even the board, as in the board as the body that is the employer.
Yeah.
For
Okay.
me, it makes an awful lot of sense that they would derive the most support from each other. And certainly as a school leader, if I was ever, and it goes back a little bit to what David was saying, if I was ever trying to introduce change, I knew if it came from somebody else on staff, it would probably have more of a chance of succeeding. And that's not me being in any way malevolent, it's me being sensible. So you get that collective willpower from people who work together, who trust each other, who know what each other are going through.
Presumably, the statistic, Martin, also shows the success of the sort of more formalized networks that ETBs have fostered, but also things like NAPD or at primary level IPPN.
Yeah. It's very much, Harold, that we're all on the same boat. I think that's the kind of feeling that the school leaders would have there. And because they're all doing the same job and they're coming up with the same challenges, they have the same language, the same discourse. I think that helps in terms of building those relationships and trust. And as an ETB, that is something that we would encourage. When we get a group of principals or deputies together, there's that formal aspect, but we also put a lot of emphasis on the informal, and I think it works very well.
David, you've talked about the strength of the collaborative within the school as well in itself, but sometimes that can be a collaborative against the school leadership.
No, that is true. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I suppose. I mean, are you asking me what is the question there? I mean, that is an absolute fact. But I mean, is your question of how do you get around that, or?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I suppose we'd be going from if people are included in the decision-making process, and if people, I suppose, genuinely feel valued. I mean, you're not going to get, well, maybe it will be very odd to get a full staff who want an authoritarian ruler. Like, that doesn't really happen. Most people who are working against a principle, now barring maybe some mad personal reasons, are because they don't feel heard or valued. I mean, that's the dominant theme. So if people are heard and valued, and if there is genuine democracy in the school, and I say they can put things on the agenda for staff meetings and all that kind of stuff, a lot of that gets eroded away, a lot of that bad feeling, because most people just want to have their say. I mean, they don't expect to get everything they want, nor should they. Do you know what I mean? But if they can vent about something that's happening in the school and they feel listened to and they're heard, a lot of that sort of negativity can dissipate. So I mean,
I was struck by the other sources of support, though. If you looked at Patricia's chart, right the way down the bottom, where teacher unions, school management, and Department of Education, which was the lowest of all. Okay, and in a way, I mean, Anya, you painted a very positive picture of what a school board of management could do, but aren't those statistics sort of showing that really that isn't working?
Well, I suppose they're showing that there's much more to be done.
Yeah.
And no more than what Martin has been speaking about in terms of the informal networking and all of that. There's more to be done, I suppose, in the sense that you want people to have time. People need time in the system if they are to do as David said, but then they also need to get outside of the school and get to speak with other colleagues. But again, we would have the very same experience in terms of running a middle leadership program among our schools. It is the AP2s and the AP1s working together. That's where they want the time. Any of our evaluation, they quite like the theory, but you know what? Could we have more time to talk to each other? Because we can tease things out. We can look at things differently. So I think it's what it's saying is there's much more to be done. And maybe maybe, Harold, we're asking the wrong question. Should the supports be coming from those three areas, or should we be investing on where the support is received most powerfully, as in time, capacity building, and so on, between people, between teachers, between post holders? You know?
Okay. Patricia, how did you, when you were conducting the research on that and those questions came up, what were you inclined to say about those low statistics? I mean, trade unions came out of it pretty badly. So did the management authorities, all the way, the Department of Education as well. And yet each of them will have programs supposedly supporting the development of the school leadership.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complex question. I think Anya's point is quite interesting. And certainly I do think we need, and also Martin, your comments around middle leadership, I mean, there is a real need to bolster, but also to revision what we understand by middle leadership. We're only moving away from the post holder way of thinking. Middle leaders don't see themselves as part of a leadership team in a school. And, you know, when the rubber hits the road, they'll feel more that they're, you know, that rather than go into that leadership conversation where they explain and support, it's more they can do the them and us piece because it's safer in terms of culture. So we need to help revision how we understand middle leadership and invest heavily in it. I agree. The other thing I wanted to say, and I'm sorry I've hijacked a little, but how leaders even talk about leadership, how exhausted, how full the role is, also has a bearing on whether people will apply for it. Harold, your point about I need to see it to be it is absolutely spot on. So what are we saying ourselves in our leadership role around this? That's the piece. But there is a greater piece for we should have a better balance in how leaders lean into the formal supports as well as the informal. That we need to recalibrate that balance. We need to understand what's going wrong there because something is going wrong. And sometimes it can be the divorce of how isolated and separated a leader feels. If the rubber's hitting the road in something that's awkward, can they then lean on their union? Can they lean on the department, or are they in fear of blame or that they're getting it wrong or something's awry? So until we take away what Anya's described as taking away that blame culture and allowing us to be and to see it as an evolving practice, until we take the heat out of that, those stats will stay where they are, I would think. So it's complex.
Yeah, and I don't want to focus on the negativity about the thing, but I do think it's the very fact that those statistics are low, despite the importance that each of those bodies attribute to supporting school leadership, would make me, I think, start to question about is the leadership support that they're giving coming at either in the right place at the right time or in the right formats. And one statistic, just to finish with the negative statistics for a moment, and because I want to move on, but I thought one worrying statistic was your statistic on the growth of bullying.
Yeah, it's frightening.
That people had experienced.
Yeah.
And I mean, it went in the course of a 2-year period from 22 to 24. I mean, 22% of male school leaders reported some form of bullying, experiencing some form of bullying, up to 31 in 24. Now that's a heck of a jump in a short period of time. And for females, it went from 32 to 38% of them. And I just wonder, can any of you throw any light on why that experience is happening? And that's separate now to cyberbullying and the violence thing, but just the experience of being bullied.
Can I jump in a little bit? Just because this is something I spend a huge amount of time thinking about this. So if I can jump in, first of all, it's mirroring a macro culture. We just need to be clear about that. So what was being played out with world leaders being abused in meetings is not unusual to see that replicated. What we permit, we perform. So we look at how parents are sometimes responding to schools now, almost like they're on Twitter in a keyboard warrior space. It's a completely other world, and that we need to catch up into that space. That's the first. The other is to say that education, higher education, all the way through, our stats outperform all the other sectors in relation to bullying. We have a problem, so we certainly have that. There's a third piece that's slightly complicating it, which is we're inclined to call everything bullying. So we're not quite discreet or clear about the language we're using when we're talking about particular behaviors, and we call conflict bullying. And conflict is not bullying, it can actually be healthy. So we have a bit of work to do within the profession about how we understand these modes of behavior. I'll stop because I could go on for the day on this one.
You
but it's conflict.
Anya wanted to get in on one point there.
And really the point where I wanted to come in was to actually clarify with Patricia where the source of the bullying was. And you've answered some of it in there, in that we sometimes misname. But is it heightened parent expectations? Is it more aggression from in school, or from parents, or from,
It's a few things. It's staff, but it's also parents, and we're seeing a rise in, which is an area that we're just moving into now. We're seeing a rise in upward bullying, which is really interesting. David, I was really interested in your comments too about autocratic leadership. It's not acceptable in today's day and age. We know this, and we react very strongly to it, but we're seeing a rise in upward bullying actually. So, and what's happening when people are unsuccessful for promotional posts or entitlement and upset and devastation, how we handle feedback and how we handle promotion and progression, all of these are all part of the constellation of figures here. It's not all staff. We certainly see a high increase in parental expectation and parental annoyance if they're not actually achieving what they want either. So it's a wide
your comment though has brought me to the other side of this discussion as to where do we move on from here. And I think you had a very interesting point. You're arguing at one point that the school system hasn't been sufficiently culturally aware, was the phrase I think you used, of the context in which school leadership is happening and the way that context is changing. And I got a sense from you too that you're talking about in Patricia that there's a culture, yes, of school leadership that we need to have, a particular form of school leadership that you obviously advocate for, but the need for a culture of fellowship, of being, maybe I'm summarizing because I've read you've written quite a bit about that, and in a sense of being willing to be followed, being a willing participant and supportive of school leadership. Now, you suggest that there needs to be an honest stakeholder conversation to allow that to happen. And what I suppose I'm thinking about, David and Martin and Anya, whether as stakeholders they're really up for that sort of an honest conversation, because it would be particularly challenging, I would have thought, to all three of you.
Yeah, could I come on that, Harold? I think
Martin.
It's very dependent upon the culture within the school. And I think very much, in terms of schools, the school leadership very much sets that culture. But, I think we used the word earlier in a conversation there, it was, the teachers' unions were against this or against that. I wouldn't see it being against. I would say it sometimes as holding an alternative view. And, I think if that alternative view is heard and there's respect given to the conversations there, it can go in some way to dissipating that idea of bullying and, that and animosity that sometimes can creep into a staff and it can gain traction. So I think the school leaders there, if they have a cohort of influential people or disciples within the school there, they can, in terms of their distributed leadership model there, that can influence a lot of staff. And if you're trying to make a difficult decision, that can help. But you're always going to get those there that are maybe hold that alternative view. But as you said yourself, if they feel heard, I think that's important, and there's respect given to them there in relation to that there. It can in some way dissipate that. But I think Patricia's right there too when she talked about, what people call bullying now. It can have all sorts of definitions and everything goes under bullying. And, it's one word we try to stay away from it as a management body. We say people have alternative views, that there's a conflict, but we try to stay away from the word bullying unless there's real bullying happening, because sometimes people can just put that label on it.
Harold.
David, because David, David, in a sense, what I'm trying to get at is, what are the real challenges that we have to face in the sort of conversation that Patricia is suggesting that we have? I mean, what are the questions that we have to face to actually change a culture that you can create a culture where school collaborative leadership is accepted and supported, but also that people are willing to participate as a follower in that culture.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things just to pick up on a few points, right? Just on the idea of, say, the union being obstructionist or anything, right? And
No, I'm not suggesting
no,
that.
I know you weren't, but just say, or a key stakeholder, putting our foot down and saying no. I mean, for stuff on certain issues, you have to ask why. Like, I mean, it's not purposeless. There's a reason for it. And I often hear this, and I'm not saying you guys have suggested it, but just while we're on it, this idea that, there's unions and teachers. Do you know what I mean? Like, we are the voice of teachers. We wouldn't exist without them. People voluntarily pay their money to be a part of it. So, like, when we have concerns, they are the concerns of teachers. And you must look at what are our general concerns? They're generally around resources, or is it possible, or, workload. I mean, they're quite legitimate. And, like, will this be the same for a student in a deaf school as an island school, as a Dublin? There's lots of different reasons. But anyway, on one of the examples that Patricia mentioned was around peer evaluation, right? And I mean, there's a short answer to that and there's a more nuanced one, right? And the more nuanced one is, I mean, two teachers having a conversation and voluntarily deciding to go and look at each other's practice is fine, and has always been fine for the TUI. The problem comes when you start assuming that one, school leadership is a good teacher, because good teachers don't necessarily make good leaders, and good leaders don't necessarily make good teachers. So there is a conflict there. But there's also what's more problematic on that front is, and for the TUI, is we have a very long probation period for teachers. You're about 2 years. You have to start your third year before you're even permanent, right? And if you start getting observed or evaluated by senior leadership, the educational value is gone. You're playing for your job. You're playing. So you're teaching for your job. You're teaching for to get your money. It's not about improvement or anything. It's box ticky. It loses that effect. In regards with tough conversations that have to happen, I mean, there's two core ones. One is on actual, I mean, if the department and government are serious, you have to front up with the cash, you have to front up with time for people, otherwise it's meaningless. On the second one, it is on the ground, I suppose, principals immediately in their training realizing, maybe, and it could happen already, but that they have to listen to people, and staff meetings need to be based on a consensus, and people need to hear their opinions. And finally, just like, and this is more of a long-term, out-of-the-box kind of idea, but like, as teachers get older and are, say, might be teaching 30 years or so, and we have a recruitment crisis, trying to keep them in the profession, we might need to be innovative. So, like, there could be ideas where we reduce their timetables, but they get other duties along with it, so they stay an extra 5 years in the job, and there's a diversification in their job. That, and then you've got really.
I'm going to give on you just a last word, David. Sorry,
No
because then we really have to. We've got over time actually at this stage. We're a minute over time at the moment, I think. Anya,
look what you've done to us, Harold. You've got us all excited. I think that was an interesting question that you posed, putting the three stakeholders in that scenario, because actually I think we're all saying the same thing. We are all saying that we want respectful disagreement, and we want time to have those disagreements and to come to consensus. So we're all going back. If we want to create the kind of culture that is built on collaboration, our teachers and our school leaders and our boards need time.
okay. I think we'll leave it at that one. John, do you want to just conclude?
Very briefly, I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank Patricia in particular for being extremely provocative in the very best possible way in her presentation. I have to say thanks obviously to David, but if you like, that's just formality, but particularly to Anya and to Martin and Harold, to yourself, for being a supremely gifted ringmaster come curator. And the fact that you have actually brought us over time it's grist to my mill, because it sort of suggests precisely the sort of conversation that we are hoping can be disseminated, or if you like, the purpose and the benefit of which can be disseminated more widely. And equally, I'd just like to add my thanks to Axel for all of the help she's given before and during.
Hear, hear.
And I mentioned my own colleague, Colette. And to all of you who participated and sent in questions, thank you very much indeed. This is one of a series of webinars. And if you are interested in others, and there's a very wide variety of topics, you can access those through the ELNE network. So thank you very much indeed. And safe home seems something of a redundant phrase, given that we're all sitting more or less at home. But for anybody who has to take a bus, I hope it arrives on time.
Okay, and we do have one or two research questions about your research, Patricia, which I'll email to you. You might be able to respond to the ELNet about that, about the details of your research.
Yeah.
So thank you all very much indeed, and thank you to the participants for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks. Very well chaired, Harold. Thank you so much.
Slán in
Thank you.
Slán.
Thanks very much.
Bye now. Thank